G'day, Clinton. Thanks for having me.
I've got to concede, and I'm fortunate I've never been called up for jury duty. When I say I'm fortunate, of course, I'd like to serve, but I don't quite know how you'd fit it in your schedule. But I was staggered when I heard that people overseas are actually being called up. I thought that would be an automatic that you wouldn't be.
Yes, I can follow the logic of that. I mean, it is a civil obligation. I think you've got the right attitude. Normally, people only get called up once or possibly twice in their life. And there is provisions for people who are normally living overseas to not be called up. Travelling overseas isn't a specific exemption that you can apply for on its own, but with the right supporting documents, it's almost always accepted. So it does sound like this person's had a pretty hard time, and I think sometimes the portal or the system that they use at the court is a bit simple, and sometimes the supporting information that's given is a bit general. But if you're able to show that you're living semi-permanently overseas, you've got a job, to expect someone to fly back to jury is ridiculous, and I think any judge in Australia would agree with that.
But even the process of having to prove that you are overseas, that while you're travelling, we're often limited in our access to documents. That's a bit of a nightmare.
Right. Yes, it is. Yeah. So normally what I'd recommend is people provide a travel itinerary and copies of their tickets, the tickets over there. And if they've got an employment contract from where they're working, then that as well. But it is a bit of a nightmare. And I agree with you on that.
Tell me just broadly, in terms of jury duty, and as I mentioned, I've been fortunate I've never been called up, but in a previous role as a manager, I wrote many letters on behalf of my staff to attempt to have them excused. What are the rules surrounding excuses for not serving?
Sure. So there's some professions that are excused automatically, so lawyers, judges, police officers, prison officers, that sort of thing. Otherwise, there are specific rules around having care business responsibilities. So it is possible to get excused for a whole range of reasons, and it actually can lead to a problem in that the jury pool becomes, for instance, young mothers or fathers with caring responsibilities for their children often aren't on juries, which you can understand why, but of course it's important that those voices are represented in the courts.
And that is the point of a jury. It's meant to be reflective of society. So your fellow colleagues can make a judgment on if you're facing charges, can make a judgment on you.
Right, that's right. And I should stress that almost all trials in Australia are a judge alone, no juries. Juries are only required in serious criminal offences. So in a civil case, a property dispute, no jury. In a minor criminal matter in the magistrate's court, no jury. It's only where people are facing, when you're talking murder, manslaughter, serious assault, major thefts, that a jury of your peers is making a decision about whether you're guilty or innocent, not just a judge.
If you have served on a jury, can you be called again a second time?
It is possible. You're normally excluded for 5 years. Rare for someone to be called twice in a lifetime. It's normally a kind of a once-in-a-lifetime thing. But it is possible to be called sort of twice, if you like. The most I've ever heard of is people being called twice. And people have mixed feelings about it. It's obviously a big imposition on someone's life, depending on your responsibilities. But it's also can be quite an interesting and illuminating thing to be part of,
But I can imagine, there's also a financial cost for some people, depending on what their income is.
Yes, absolutely. So you get paid like a minimum wage, but of course your income might be higher than that, and the minimum wage doesn't do much for you. And you could have a very significant trial. So some murder trials go for months at a time. So you might be away from your work for months. Sometimes your work will cover that. Sometimes they won't. Often small business people really struggle with it because if they're running their own business, being away and getting a minimum wage is really not appropriate, and then they can get excused. It's really a matter of providing really strong evidence of that, because I think people often quite flippantly say, look, I don't want to do it. They say, I'm too busy. I'm planning on going to Adelaide next week. That's not enough. But if they're able to provide strong evidence of those things, then they are excused.
Well, Alex, just lastly, can you give us just a couple of tips on if you feel you can't serve on a jury, whether you want to or not, how do you present your case?
Yes, so the issue is about you being able to attend court when and where you need to. So if you can show that you can't attend because you're overseas, you can't attend because you have caring responsibilities for children or for your elderly parents or for whatever, or if you can show you've got business responsibilities that can't be sort of filled in. If you work for Coles, you'll probably be all right because someone else can do your job. But if you work for a small business, possibly at your station, that kind of thing where your job can't be replaced. But it's evidence. The court don't want to just hear, or I should say the jury office don't want to just hear, I can't do it because I'm too busy. They want to see some evidence that supports that. And my experience is they do get excused in appropriate circumstances.
Okay, so don't simply say you're too busy. Just provide a bit of evidence that you've got to care for children, you need to care for loved ones, or the business can't basically manage without you.
Exactly right, yeah. And the court, I found it, the jury office themselves are very helpful and the judges are very helpful, but I think sometimes the administrative process is a bit daunting, and I think perhaps for your listener who was, a younger person who was travelling, and, it might have been a daunting thing for her to deal with. But I'd say ring the jury office, ask them what they need, and then do your best to provide that.
Thank you, Alex. Appreciate your insight.
Pleasure, Clinton. See you next time.
Alex Martin, who's a director with Taurus Lawyers.